I used to believe that if you piled enough money between yourself and the world, nothing messy could reach you. That illusion shattered the moment I saw him in the aisle of plastic dinosaurs and blinking dolls, holding a single cheap toy like it was made of glass. Isabel Harrington stepped into the toy store with the automatic confidence of someone who had long forgotten the price of anything on the shelves. Outside, the December evening in Manhattan was a blur of headlights and drizzle, the kind of cold that pinched the skin and made the city's wealth glitter harder. Inside, the store hummed with artificial warmth and tinny Christmas music, fluorescent lights bouncing off polished tiles and glossy boxes. The air smelled of cardboard and sugar from the candy counter. She tightened her grip on her son's small hand. "Stay close, Noah," she said. He was 8, all restless energy and wide eyes. He tugged against her, drawn by a display of remote-control cars racing in a loop. "Mom, look, that one's like a rocket." "We'll see," Isabel murmured, though she already knew she would buy it if he truly wanted it. There had been a time, long ago, when she had memorized price tags before touching anything, when birthday wishes had been carefully calculated against electricity bills. That time was buried under tailored coats, private drivers, and the machinery of Harrington Capital. She moved deeper into the store, past parents arguing in low voices, toddlers on the brink of tantrums, teenagers scrolling through their phones. Conversations overlapped. "Do you think she'll like this?" "That's too expensive. We'll put it on the card." The store felt like a contained storm of want and limitation. Then she saw him. He stood near the back where the cheaper toys were lined up in uneven rows. His coat hung off him in tired folds, once black, but now the color of pavement, frayed at the cuffs. His jeans were threadbare, shoes cracked at the seams, edges white with dried salt from winter slush. His hair curled around his ears in unwashed strands, and a beard shadowed his jaw. A backpack sagged at his feet. He did not belong there, not in the way everyone else did with their reusable bags and holiday sale coupons. He stood too still, almost wary, as if the shelves themselves might reject him. Yet what stopped Isabel wasn't the contrast of his presence with the shiny aisles. It was the way he held the toy. It was a small, simple action figure. The cardboard backing was bent at one corner, the plastic bubble slightly scuffed. His fingers, rough and cracked, cradled it as carefully as if he were holding a newborn's wrist. He turned it over, reading the back, lips moving silently. "Mom, can I go see the Lego?" Noah's voice jolted her. "In a minute," she replied. Something in her chest tightened, a faint pressure that felt like recognition, and she didn't know why. The man's head lifted slightly, and for a fleeting moment, Isabel had the sensation that he knew he was being watched. His shoulders tensed. He didn't look around, but his hand trembled just enough for the toy to rustle in its packaging. She should have turned away. She knew how to do that, how to smooth over discomfort with a polite smile, averted eyes, and a quick retreat into the safe orbit of her own life. But her feet stayed rooted. "Noah," she said quietly, "stay right by my side, okay?" He frowned but nodded, his gaze sliding past her toward the Lego aisle. Isabel took an almost imperceptible step closer to the man, pretending to study a shelf of board games. From here she could hear the music more clearly, a crooning voice singing about miracles and snow, disconnected from the fluorescent reality around them. "Come on," someone called from another aisle, frustration sharp. "We don't have all night." The man with the worn coat lowered the toy and glanced toward the cash registers. Isabel followed his gaze. A young cashier stood behind the counter, tapping a pen against the side of the register. A line had formed, parents shifting from foot to foot, children whining, a toddler crying. The man turned the toy back over, thumb tracing the barcode, and then very slowly his eyes lifted and found hers. She had not expected that. In those eyes, dark, tired, framed by lines that came from both worry and laughter long past, there was something startlingly clear. Not anger, not shame, but a wary dignity and something else she couldn't name. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, two lives balanced at the edge of recognition. Then he gave the smallest of nods. Not a greeting, not exactly. More like an acknowledgement that they were both real, both standing in the same harsh light, even if their lives existed on opposite sides of an invisible wall. Isabel felt heat rise to her face. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was something older, rooted in nights when her own mother had counted coins at a kitchen table and sighed without realizing she was doing it. She broke the gaze first, clearing her throat, fingers smoothing the collar of her coat, as if rearranging fabric could rearrange reality. "Mom?" Noah tugged her hand again. You promised we'd pick something for the party. I know, she said. Let's look over here. But she didn't move. The toy in the man's hand gleamed under the lights, cheap plastic catching a reflection that made it look almost luminous. There was a careful slowness to his movements, the way someone moves when they are acutely aware of each penny. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not a list. It was a receipt of some kind, worn at the creases. Embedded in the white edge, just visible where he gripped it, was a logo Isabel recognized instantly. Harrington Capital, printed in small, clean letters across the corner. Her breath caught so sharply that Noah glanced up at her, startled. The noise of the store receded to a dull hum. She knew that paper, not that exact one, but the type. The quarterly notification sent to investors, clients, partners. The ones she signed with a pen that cost more than the toy in his hand. What is he doing with that? The question flashed through her mind. The receipt looked months old, the ink slightly faded from being folded and unfolded, handled too often. The man's thumb brushed absently over her printed surname, as if he were tracing it. Harrington. As if he had done it many times before. She didn't notice that she had stopped breathing until the man slipped the old receipt back into his pocket and looked up again. This time, his gaze held something different, something like the fragile hesitation of someone who isn't sure if they're allowed to speak. Isabel felt a faint shiver run along her arms, as though the temperature in the aisle had dropped by a degree. Noah tugged her hand again, impatient now. "Mom, can we go?" "In a moment," she whispered, eyes still fixed on the stranger. He hesitated, then slowly lifted the toy, turning it so the small action figure faced her, its cheap plastic grin somehow unbearably hopeful under the bright lights. "He likes these," the man said finally, voice low, raspy, as if he wasn't used to speaking much. "Always has." The words struck her oddly. She didn't know him. She didn't know who he referred to, perhaps a son, perhaps someone else, but the way he said it carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "That's a good choice," Isabel replied softly, surprised at how gentle her own voice sounded. "My son used to love those when he was younger." The man nodded, though something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, or a shadow of something deeper. He looked down at the toy again, adjusting his grip as if the way he held it mattered. "It's his birthday tomorrow," he said. "I thought, maybe—" His words trailed off, unfinished and unnecessary. Isabel understood anyway. Her throat tightened. She didn't want him to see it, but the emotion rose quickly, pulling her somewhere she hadn't intended to go. Memories surfaced. Her own childhood birthdays, celebrated with dollar store cupcakes and second-hand toys wrapped in old newspaper. Her mother's tired smile, the way she had pretended not to hear the whispered arguments in the kitchen about bills they couldn't pay. She cleared her throat. "I'm sure he'll love it." He looked at her then, really looked, with an intensity that made her pulse skip. Not intrusive. Searching, as if he were trying to see whether she meant what she said, or whether it was just a polite lie offered from above. Before Isabel could speak again, a loud crash echoed across the aisle. Noah had knocked a box of puzzles off the shelf. They skittered across the floor in a colorful avalanche. Isabel flinched, turning automatically. "Noah, be careful." "Sorry," he said quickly, crouching to gather the pieces. She reached down to help, but a voice behind her spoke before she could. "He's fine." The man had stepped closer. Just a single step, but enough that she registered the faint scent of cold air clinging to his clothes, mixed with something earthy, like old leather and rain. His presence wasn't threatening, but it felt charged, as if the air between them had tightened. Noah looked up, his small hands full of puzzle boxes. "Hi," he said simply, blinking at the stranger without fear. The man nodded softly. "Hey, buddy." Noah tilted his head. "Do you have a kid too?" Isabel opened her mouth to intervene, but the man answered before she could. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." His eyes shifted toward the toy again, almost involuntarily. Noah followed the movement, then smiled with the blunt innocence of a child raised without financial fear. "That's a cool one. My mom buys me stuff like that all the time." Isabel winced at the unintended cruelty woven into the honesty, but the man didn't flinch, if anything. A faint, weary smile touched his mouth. "You're lucky," he said gently. "Hold on to that." Noah nodded, not fully understanding, and Isabel placed a hand on his shoulder to guide him away. "Come on," she murmured. "Let's give the man some space." But the moment she turned, the man spoke again. "Do you ever feel like you're buying the wrong things?" She froze. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved closer, but the words wrapped around her like invisible fingers. They were too pointed, too knowing. They struck a place inside her she rarely allowed anyone to touch. She turned slowly. "What do you mean?" The man hesitated, eyes roaming the aisle as though searching for an explanation that wouldn't sound absurd. "Sometimes," he said finally, "you walk into a place like this thinking you know exactly what you're looking for, but then something feels off, like you're reaching for the wrong shelves, the wrong reasons." His gaze drifted to Noah, then back to her, like you're missing something important. His tone was gentle, but the implication was sharp as glass. Heat rose in Isabel's chest, a mix of discomfort and defensiveness. She had spent her entire adult life constructing a fortress of control around herself, her image, her choices, her success. No one questioned it. No one questioned her. "How would you know what I'm missing?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. But there was a crack in it. She heard it, and he did too. The man lowered his eyes for a beat. When he looked back up, his expression had softened. "People miss the same things," he said quietly. "Doesn't matter where they live or what they have." Her breath stilled. He shouldn't have been able to say that. Not with such calm certainty. Not with that unsettling precision, as if he had glimpsed something inside her through a door she had never opened for anyone. Before she could respond, a store announcement crackled overhead, the speaker buzzing. "Attention shoppers, the store will be closing in 30 minutes. Noah groaned. "Already? We still have time," Isabel murmured automatically, but her voice felt distant. She was still staring at the man. He shifted the toy in his hand, eyes dropping again to the bright plastic figure. Something about that small gesture, humble, careful, almost reverent, made emotions swell unexpectedly in her chest. "Is it for your son?" she asked before she could stop herself. The man hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "Yes," he said. She sensed the half-truth in it. Not a lie, more like a doorway with a shadow behind it. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. "What's his name?" she asked softly. A long silence. Too long. When he finally answered, the faint tremor in his voice caught her off guard. "Ethan." Something in the name made her inhale sharply. She didn't know why. It was a common name. And yet, she felt it land inside her like a stone dropped into deep water, rippling outward with an emotion she couldn't identify. "He's a good kid," the man continued. "Smart, brave. Too brave sometimes." Isabel swallowed. Where is he tonight? Another silence. A heavier one. His throat worked as he exhaled slowly. "Not where he should be," he said. The answer chilled her. Not where he should be. Isabel instinctively glanced around the store, as though expecting to see a small boy wandering alone between the aisles. But there was no one. No lost child. No parents calling a name. Her mind spun through possibilities. Custody battles, homelessness, shelters, hospitals, but none of them fit perfectly into the tone of his voice. "How old is he?" she whispered. The man lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time she saw something raw there. Something like grief held together by a single thread. "He would have been 9. Isabel stopped breathing. The phrasing, the past tense, the impossible quiet behind the words. Noah, still crouched nearby, looked between them with innocent confusion. "I'm sorry," Isabel whispered automatically. The words were too small, too inadequate, but the man shook his head. "No, you couldn't have known." He looked down again, thumb brushing the plastic toy with a tenderness that made her stomach twist. "I used to buy him one toy every year," he murmured. "Even when things got bad. Even when we didn't have a place to stay, I told him it didn't matter how much it cost. What mattered was consistency, something to look forward to, something that didn't disappear." His voice cracked on the last word. Disappear. Isabel felt something break inside her. The shelves of toys blurred for a moment. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt close to tears. Not out of pity, but out of a strange, disorienting sense that this moment was not random. That their paths had crossed for a reason she did not yet understand. For a long, trembling moment, Isabel couldn't speak. The sounds of the toy store dimmed behind a slow pulse in her ears. Children laughed somewhere near the front. A shopping cart rattled. Christmas music tried to stitch cheer into the fluorescent air, but none of it reached her fully. She was standing in front of a man holding a cheap action figure, like a relic from a life fractured beyond repair. "I didn't mean to bring the mood down," he said quietly, noticing something shift in her posture. "You came here for a happy moment with your son. I shouldn't..." intrude on that. You didn't, Isabel whispered, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Something inside her felt different, unsettled, alert, deeply aware of a boundary between worlds she had never truly crossed. The man gave a small nod, as if acknowledging a truth he wasn't naming. Then he stepped back, putting a slight distance between them, though not enough to break the strange gravity of the moment. Noah finished restacking the puzzle boxes and stood, wiping dust from his hands onto his jacket. "Mom, are you okay?" Isabel blinked and forced a small smile. "Yes, honey. Just thinking." The man's gaze flicked toward Noah, softening for a fleeting second with something that looked like longing or memory. Isabel caught it, and the air between them tightened again. She wasn't imagining it. There was something here, something unspoken, fragile as thin ice. Noah tugged her sleeve. "Can we go pick the Lego now?" "In a minute," she murmured, though her focus remained on the stranger. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets, shoulders drawing slightly inward. The movement revealed a small tear in the fabric near his elbow, threads frayed like something worn past its final usefulness. Isabel's throat tightened. "When did Ethan—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't dare shape the full sorrow into words. The man looked away, gazing at a row of dolls whose painted smiles shone under the lights. 7 months ago, he said softly. It was sudden, wrong place, wrong time, a driver who wasn't looking. His voice hollowed. I was 3 steps behind him. Her small, invisible blade slid under Isabel's ribs. She didn't know this man, she didn't know Ethan, yet the grief radiating from him felt startlingly real, like a cold wind that carried memories of her own narrow escapes, her own fears, the terrible randomness of loss she had avoided only through luck and timing. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but this time it wasn't automatic. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere more fragile. He nodded once, as if accepting the apology for what it was, meaningful but powerless. "I come here sometimes," he said quietly, "not always to buy something, sometimes just to remember what it was like to have a reason to celebrate, to plan something, to look forward." His gaze touched the toy, then moved away quickly. "Stupid, I know." "It isn't stupid," Isabel said, her voice barely above a breath. He looked at her again, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow around the two of them. There was no romance in the air, not yet. Only empathy, recognition, the quiet shudder of 2 lives brushing against each other in a place neither expected. "Mom?" Noah asked again. "Can we go now?" "Soon," she murmured. He sighed dramatically and drifted a few feet away, distracted by a display of small robots. Isabel let him move but kept him in the corner of her vision. The man's hands tightened in his pockets. "I shouldn't keep you," he said. "You have things to buy, a life to get back to." His tone wasn't resentful. It was factual, almost resigned. Isabel felt something flare inside her, an urge she didn't entirely understand. "You don't need to rush off," she said. "It's okay." He offered a faint smile. "People usually say that when they want you to leave gently. That's not what I meant." He studied her as if trying to decide whether she was telling the truth. "You have no reason to talk to me," he said quietly. "Most people don't." I don't think that's true," she said, though she wasn't sure why she insisted. He looked at her with a heaviness that made her chest ache. "I'm not used to kindness," he admitted. "Not anymore." The words landed too hard, too precise, as if he were answering a question she hadn't voiced. Isabel took a slow breath. "What was Ethan like?" she asked softly. The man's expression shifted, something tender flickering through the grief. "He was bright, obsessed with science kits and space, thought he'd grow up to fix everything wrong with the world." He laughed quietly, the sound dry. "Funny how kids believe in impossible things." "Maybe not so impossible," she murmured. He gave her a look, a quiet, searching one that almost made her step back. "Do you believe that, really?" she swallowed. "I used to. And now." She hesitated, then exhaled. "Now, I think I've forgotten how." His gaze softened in a way that felt almost dangerous, not threatening but intimate, as if he could see more than he should, as if he could read the tiredness behind her expensive coat, the loneliness tucked between appointments, the guilt that whispered she spent too much money and too little time. "You don't look like someone who's forgotten hope," he said quietly. "You don't know me." "Maybe," he said, "but I can see the parts people usually hide." The words stole her breath, because they were true, because they felt aimed at the hollow place inside her she'd been pretending not to feel. Before she could respond, The overhead lights flickered slightly, something so subtle most shoppers didn't notice. But the man did. His shoulders stiffened, eyes sharpening. Isabel frowned. "Are you okay?" He looked around the store, jaw tightening for a moment. "Yeah," he said, but the answer didn't sound convincing. "Just thought I saw someone." Her pulse skipped. "Someone you know?" His silence told her the answer wasn't simple. He cleared his throat and shook his head. "Never mind. It's nothing." But the tension in his posture remained. Isabel followed his gaze and found nothing, just aisles of blinking toys and parents hurrying to finish their purchases. Then, as the store's speakers crackled again with another announcement, a small object slipped from the man's jacket pocket and fell to the floor with a soft tap. A photo. He didn't notice. Isabel did. It had landed face down near her boot. Before she could stop herself, she bent and picked it up. Her fingers trembled when she turned it over. The photograph was old, edges creased. In it, a young boy, Ethan, smiled widely in a park, holding a small kite. Beside him stood a woman with warm eyes and wind-tangled hair. But that wasn't what made Isabel freeze. In the background, blurred, partly obscured by sunlight, was a familiar building. Not familiar in the way a tourist attraction was familiar, familiar in the way a memory was. Her childhood apartment complex, the one she had lived in until she was 11. Her breath hitched, cold spread through her limbs. The man noticed then, turning sharply. "What are you—" She held the photo out with shaking fingers. "This place," she whispered. "Where was this taken?" His face drained of color. For the first time, genuine alarm flickered across his expression. Real, raw, unguarded. "How do you know that building?" he asked, voice low and shaken. Isabel felt her heartbeat thunder in her ears. "Because," she whispered, "I lived there." The man stared at her as if she had spoken a secret she had no right to know. His throat worked, his grip tightening around the toy until the plastic creaked softly. "That's not possible," he murmured. "It can't be." "Why?" she breathed. "Why can't it be?" He looked at her then, a look filled with something like awe and fear intertwined. "Because," he whispered, "that photo was taken the day everything changed, the day before Ethan died. And the woman standing behind him," his voice broke, "was looking at someone who wasn't supposed to be there." "Who?" Isabel whispered. He swallowed hard. "You," he said. "She was looking at you." And Isabel felt the world tilt beneath her feet. For a second, Isabel wondered if she had misheard him, if the fluorescent lights and the tinny music and the press of December bodies had finally pushed her beyond reason. But the look in his eyes was too clear, too steady. It was not the gaze of someone speaking in metaphors or fever dreams. It was the gaze of someone remembering something that hurt. "That doesn't make sense," she said, though her voice sounded far away like it belonged to someone else. "I haven't been back there in years." He stared at her, jaw tight, fingers shaking around the toy. "You were there," he said, 7 months ago, the day before his birthday, before—" His throat worked. "You were standing by the gate, with a car waiting. I remember the license plate, the driver's suit, the way you looked up at the building like it was a ghost." Isabel's pulse thundered in her ears. Memory shifted in her mind like a curtain catching a breeze. She saw herself suddenly standing on a cracked sidewalk in front of a building she had sworn she would never revisit. She had been on her way to a board meeting, her calendar choked with names and numbers and deals, and yet on some impulsive, inexplicable instinct, she had asked her driver to take a detour. "I just want to see it," she had said. "It'll only be a moment." She'd stood in front of the rusted gate, the old brick walls rising above her, the windows patched with mismatched curtains. Children's voices had floated down from somewhere, the same way they had when she was 10 and the world was small and unpredictable. She had looked up and felt a sharp, dizzying mixture of gratitude and guilt and something like grief. "Yes," she whispered now, more to herself than to him. I was there." The man exhaled shakily, as if that confirmation hurt and relieved him at the same time. "My wife was watching from the window," he said. "Ethan too. He'd pressed his face to the glass, asking why there was a fancy car outside, why that woman looked like she was made of light." His smile twisted. "We didn't know who you were then. Not really. But my wife stared at you like she recognized something, like she knew you didn't belong there anymore." Isabel's stomach clenched. "I didn't see anyone." "You wouldn't have," he said. "You were looking at the building, not at us." Her fingers tightened around the photograph. In the corner of the image, barely visible, the edge of a dark car peeked into frame. The reflection in the window was blurry, but she could almost imagine the faint outline of her own figure, coated, polished, separated by glass and time from the curled-haired boy in the foreground. "I still don't understand," she said, though pieces were beginning to slide into place in ways she didn't like. "Why are you holding a Harrington Capital receipt? Why do you have my name in your pocket?" His hand drifted to his coat, pressing against the folded paper as though to steady himself. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but each word fell heavy in the air. "2 weeks after we saw you there," he said. "We got the notice, new ownership, renovation plans, repositioning the asset. Everyone in the building was given 30 days to leave." Isabel's vision blurred for a heartbeat, then sharpened with painful clarity. She knew those phrases. She had signed them, approved them, reviewed them in neat black text on glossy presentations. The building had been part of a portfolio acquisition, a line item on a report summarized in a single sentence. Substantial upside through redevelopment and tenant repositioning. "You're saying—" Her voice faltered. "You were living there?" "Yes," he said simply. "3rd floor, apartment 3B. The ceiling leaked every time it rained. The heat clanged like it was dying. The walls were too thin. But it was home. It was all we had left." Her hands were cold now, the edges of the photograph biting into her skin. "The building was unsafe," she said automatically, the reflex of someone repeating legal and financial justifications that had once seemed logical, distant, necessary. "We had to modernize it. It was supposed to—" "Make money," he finished, not unkindly but with a tired accuracy that made her flinch. "I know, I've read the reports. I read everything I could get my hands on once I realized whose name was on the papers." "What happened?" she whispered. He looked at the toy, then at her, then at Noah, who was still hovering nearby, confusion clouding his small face. The man swallowed hard. "We tried to find another place," he said. "We really did. My wife worked night shifts. I picked up any odd job I could. But the deposits they wanted—" He shook his head. "We sold everything we could, furniture, the TV, her jewelry. We never had much, but we had to let go of even that. It wasn't enough." A pause stretched between them, taut and fragile. "So we ended up at a shelter," he continued. "One of those places where they tell you it's temporary, where hope is painted on the walls, but the beds creak and the air smells like bleach and exhaustion." Ethan tried to be brave. He slept with his old toy under his pillow every night. The action figure in his hand, Isabel realized, wasn't just a toy. It was a thread to something he no longer had. "On his birthday," the man said, voice thinning, "we were walking back from the community center. They'd given him a cupcake with a candle stuck in it, and he was holding it like it was treasure. We were laughing about something. Stupid, I don't even remember what. And I didn't see the car until it was too late." Isabel's heart clenched. A slow, crushing ache. "He ran ahead," the man whispered. "Just a few steps. Kids do that. They get excited. He stepped off the curb and—" He stopped, eyes closing briefly. The driver never slowed down. Tears burned behind Isabel's eyes. She saw it, even though she hadn't been there. The flash of headlights, the screech of metal, the shattering of a life into before and after. She saw a cupcake smashed on the asphalt, frosting smeared into the cracks. "It wasn't your fault," she said, her voice breaking. "You couldn't have—" "I know I didn't hit him," he said, "but everything that pushed us onto that street, onto that timing, that's where the lines blur, don't they?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know how. Around them, the store carried on. A little girl squealed somewhere near the stuffed animals. A couple argued quietly over a price. The speakers poured out another song about joy and miracles. It all felt obscenely distant. "When I started digging into what happened to the building," he went on, "I thought I'd just find faceless investors, names that meant nothing, numbers, funds." His fingers pressed harder against the receipt in his pocket. "I didn't expect to find a story behind the signature, a girl who grew up in that very building, who fought her way out and built an empire. The articles talked about grit, vision, breaking cycles of poverty." His gaze met hers, not accusing but unbearably steady. "They never mentioned what happened to the people she left behind when the cycle got too profitable to share." Her breath hitched. Shame flooded her, thick and hot, not because she had consciously chosen this man's suffering, but because she had never thought to look for it. She had stood outside her old building and whispered a silent thank you to the universe for how far she'd come. then gotten back into her car and instructed her driver to take her to a meeting where they discussed redevelopment strategies in a room smelling of polished wood and espresso. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear to you I didn't know. I never saw the individual files. It was all spreadsheets and projections and—" "I believe you," he said quietly. She blinked, startled. "You do?" He nodded. "You didn't know my name, or Ethan's, or my wife's. That's not how your world works. You don't need faces to move numbers." A sad, almost gentle smile touched his lips, but not knowing doesn't erase the impact. The truth of it settled between them like a third presence. Noah shifted closer, sensing the heaviness without understanding it. He slipped his hand into hers, small fingers squeezing. "Mum?" he asked in a small voice. "Are you crying?" She hadn't realized the tears had spilled over. She wiped them quickly with the back of her hand. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm okay." The man watched her, expression complicated. Pain, yes, but something else too. Something like curiosity, maybe even a flicker of compassion, fragile as a match in the wind. "I didn't come here to confront you," he said. "I didn't even know you'd be here. I came to, I don't know, try to feel close to him again, to buy something he would have loved and tell myself it wasn't completely pointless." His knuckles whitened around the toy. "Seeing you was just another thing I wasn't ready for." "Then why tell me all this?" she asked softly. His eyes searched hers. "Because you asked," he said simply, "and because, maybe, you were meant to hear it." The words lodged in her chest. Destiny, coincidence, the invisible thread she had always dismissed in favor of logic and control, now wrapped tight around this fluorescent-lit moment. She looked at the toy, at the old photo in her hand, at the Harrington Capital logo on the faded receipt pressing against his heart, at Noah, who was watching them both with solemn eyes far older than his years. "I can't change what happened," she said, the admission tasting like ash. "No matter what I do, it won't bring him back. It won't erase the notice on your door or that night in the street." "No," he agreed quietly. "It won't." "But I can't walk away from this," she said, voice trembling. "Not now, not knowing." A long silence followed. The store announcement buzzed again overhead.